Let's get right to our panel now. The Laughing Crystal Ball is one of the hosts of The Cycle, which we just saw less than half an hour ago on MSNBC. And Richard Wolff is an author, journalist and an MSNBC political analyst. Thank you both for joining us. Crystal, Rick Perry is at least the 7th governor, I believe, to indicate that his state will say no to the new Medicaid funding under the president's healthcare reform. By coincidence, none of these governors are up for re-election this year. Do you think that when it comes to 2014 and the healthcare reforms are actually implemented and these people have to face election, do you think they might start changing their minds a bit?
I hope so, but I'm not particularly hopeful because I think the Republicans are going to make this a litmus issue. They've spent so much time demagoguing, quote-unquote, Obamacare, that I think this will become a new litmus issue for the Grover Norquists, the Club for Growths, the Tea Party Expresses of the world, and anyone who wants to survive a Republican primary and was in a position to, thumb their nose at the federal government over this and didn't do it, I think is going to pay the price in a Republican primary.
But Rick Perry's got something against women, hasn't he, here? Because Rick Perry's already rejected federal money on the basis that he doesn't want to support Planned Parenthood.
Right.
If he decides not to take this money as well, the predicament for women in need of very basic health care is going to worsen and worsen in that state.
That's absolutely right, because women rely disproportionately on Medicaid. And as you said, as unfortunate as this is, I mean, we're talking about 2 million Texans in the state that has the worst rate of uninsurance in the country. 2 million Texans.
25% of adults in Texas.
Right, uninsured. So 2 million Texans will lose out because of this. But unfortunately, we shouldn't be surprised because, as you just pointed out, Rick Perry has already turned down Medicaid funding for a program that would benefit low-income women to provide preventative well women care. And he did it just so that he could sort of spite Planned Parenthood. So this should not be surprising. He also said back in November of 2011 that they were sort of toying with the idea of not doing Medicaid at all. So unfortunately, it's not a surprise.
OK, we'll bring Richard Wolff in because this isn't the Crystal Ball show because it was really... I mean, fair enough. Look, these governors, Richard, they tell us that they're going to reject this money in the form of Rick Perry. And this gentleman, Mr. Romney, says that he'll repeal and replace Obamacare. I haven't heard one person tell me what they're going to replace this with, whether in the state or at a federal level. Explain.
Well, to be fair, they have come up with ideas. They're just ideas that won't work. Things like selling insurance across state lines.
We know that works well.
Tort reform. None of those are addressing the core issues, which is either the cost of health care or the uninsured.
30 million people.
Right, so they have some talking points about health care, but they don't actually even try to address those problems. I just want to come back to how the health care law is changing politics now, how we've seen the polls move since the Supreme Court, and how it will move after implementation. Because remember, we haven't seen a lot implemented already. Now the debate is, do you want stuff taken away from you? Now, many people don't understand what's in this law, but they certainly don't want things taken away from them when they could be positive. And this whole debate will get framed up for these governors alongside other states that do take this Medicaid funding, where this law is being implemented, and they are going to look bad by comparison. By the way, these are also a bunch of governors who have said in the past very bad things about the Recovery Act, about stimulus spending. They've campaigned against it and then written letters saying, give me the money. And by the way, I built this road and I built this and I did that and I got these jobs.
Shameless.
So I think a lot of the positioning now is going to look even more shallow in a couple of years than it does right now. And these are people who are very comfortable campaigning against something but secretly taking the money and trying to take credit for it.
But the problem with this is, unlike the stimulus where you could sort of very publicly say, no, I don't want this one particular part of it, but I'll take all that other stuff. This is very cut and dry. Do you do it or not?
Absolutely.
And there's a difference between, I agree with you, in a general election, I think it will be very damaging to Republican politicians who say no to the money. In a Republican primary, I think it's a very different story. And in a way, it's a broader narrative about how far and how out of the mainstream the Republicans have been pulled by their own party that makes it harder for them to win in general elections down the road.
Indeed. Krista, I wanted to mention the Kaiser Family Plans looked into the cost to states in 2010, and it found that under a high participation rate, the plan would require very little extra spending from states on average, I guess. So what do you have? Do you have no tax cuts and health care, or do you have tax cuts and no health care? Is that the Is that how the paradigm shift works as far as Romney's perspective is concerned?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it lines up. And of course, in the early years, the federal government is footing the entire bill. Right. So, you know, in a place like Texas, it's completely unconscionable that you would say no to these 2 million people. No, we are not going to provide you insurance. And also, if you look at the map, it just so happens, of course, that the states that are turning down the funding and that are likely to turn down the funding are also the ones who have the highest rates of uninsurance and the worst healthcare system in the country. So the very people who need this the most are the ones who are likely to be left out on the cold.
And it's costing these states money to have so many uninsured people. That's the point. It's not free for everyone. You know, it may be free at the point of service for uninsured people, but we all pick up the cost. The states themselves is costing them money. So it makes no sense. If you think your platform is fiscal responsibility, we know how to conserve taxpayer dollars.
Right.
This is a much better way to do it.
And what about the fact that many of these hospitals are going to turn around and start complaining very soon when they don't receive this money? And if a governor rejects the proposal and the implementation, what happens then when these big teaching hospitals go to their governors and say, where's the funding?
What's going on here?
Not just the hospitals, of course, but the insurers too. The insurers wanted the Healthcare Reform Act to go through. They were into this because they get all of these extra customers in and they don't have to chase people who don't have insurance as well. So, you know, the idea of industry leading the Republican Party, at some point that's got to fracture, right? They may have lobbyists who fund Republican politicians, but those lobbyists are going to turn around at some point and say, you know what, this really isn't in our interest.
Yeah.
And for the healthcare industry, the administration, much to the pain and dismay of many progressives, the White House went out of its way to get as many people on the industry on board here because they were getting a good deal out of expanding healthcare for all Americans. Indeed. That's where these governors, I think, are playing a short-term game for a very long-term problem this country faces.
And perhaps if the governors are unwilling to listen to their own people, perhaps they will listen to the people who are funding their campaigns.
Let's hope so. Richard Wolff and Crystal Ball, thank you so much.